Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Reputation Room. Today I'm joined by David Benigson, founder and CEO of Signal AI. Signal AI started in 2013 in a garage in North London, David's parents' garage. His parents ran an executive search firm, and every morning they were hand curating email newsletters, manually pulling the day's relevant stories from a sea of sources. Laborious, repetitive, human. David's idea was to let a machine do it. That is the seed of a company that today serves more than 650 enterprises and sits at the center of how some of the largest organizations in the world rate risk and reputation. A detail I find telling. David is a law graduate, not an engineer. He built Signal alongside his co-founder, the academic Dr. Miguel Martinez. The origin story isn't a coder chasing a clever model. It's a non-technical founder who saw a problem worth solving and assembled the science around it. Most of the people who come into this room use reputation intelligence. David builds it. Signal AI runs a global reputation ranking, the Signal AI 500. And that's why I wanted him here. I want to understand his vision, how he sees the future unfolding, how he thinks about reputation measurement, and how far or close he is from his original vision. David, welcome to the Reputation Room.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here today.
Very good, David. You're very welcome. Let's start in that garage, right? The inspiration was your parents' executive search business and a newsletter they were curating by hand. What made you think there was an opportunity there?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I always do start my my pitches to clients and the story when we tell the story of the business starting in the garage because we're in good company there with some other technology businesses that started in garages and went on to big things. And it was a real garage next door to a mechanics where I still get my car serviced annually. And in fact, when we were raising our seed round of funding for the business from venture capital funds, I invited them to come and get their cars MOT'd, their annual checkup, with a discount at the mechanics next door. So that's how we attracted our original investors to come and visit us in our windowless garage. But I guess as you mentioned there, you know, my parents who run this executive search business had sort of produced this handcrafted daily newsletter that went out to the executives that they work with, the candidates and the clients. And I guess what struck me back then, over a decade ago, was the gap between the value of the output and the cost of producing it. Mm-hmm. You know, every morning, my parents' team would sit and manually trawl through hundreds of sources to hand curate these newsletters that their clients genuinely loved. And the intelligence was clearly valuable, but the process was clearly repetitive and unscalable. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking that this cannot be unique to them. You know, every organization in the world is trying to make sense of what's happening outside of their business, about what's being said out there that might impact them. And almost all of them were doing it through some combination of manual effort, keyword search, gut feel, intuition, traditional sorts of clippings and monitoring services. And so the information existed. In fact, the information was scaling at a rate we'd never seen before. The problem was quickly turning an ocean of noise into a signal that our clients could act on. And that's the problem that we set out to solve. And that's literally where the name came from, to turn signal from noise. And so the thing that really gave me conviction was knowing that this wasn't going to be a nice to have, that already decisions were being made off the back of this sort of information and data, real commercial decisions, not sort of vanity-based decisions. And so I knew from day one that we weren't building another monitoring business. We were going to be building a decision intelligence platform. And really the question was, what was going to be the journey for us to go from sort of the starting point to actually delivering true decision intelligence?
I'm now thinking, did Signal AI started as Signal AI or as Signal, and then you guys added the AI later on?
Well, I incorporated the business back in 2013 as Signal Media. But within about 18 months, we rebranded. We kept the limited company name at Signal Media, but we rebranded the business to Signal AI. And so we probably were one of the first businesses, certainly in the UK, potentially even in the world, to put AI into our company name. We're certainly now not the last. Obviously, the world has gone very, very excited about AI and what it's capable of doing. But certainly back then, we were pretty early in seeing that, we had this business problem that we wanted to solve. We had this very strong hypothesis and conviction. And then we had a belief that machine learning, which is one of the foundational technologies, of course, of AI, was starting to become incredibly useful and capable for understanding language and being able to deliver the work of reading, classifying, prioritizing data at a scale no human ever could. And so that's where, the relationship, as you mentioned in your introduction, with my co-founder, Dr. Miguel Martinez, was so important. He was coming out of academia, was finishing his PhD at the time that we founded the business, real deep expertise in natural language processing. And what we believed was that we would be able to take this technology and transform that ocean of data into meaningful signals, meaningful insights. And that AI was the only credible way that we could, solve that problem at scale. And so we made a bet very, very early that this language technology would continue to compound. And that bet turned out for us to be defining, because we've been an AI company for over a decade. We have that technology built natively into everything that we offer to our clients. And ultimately then the market, started to wake up to that reality and that opportunity. And we've always felt we've had a real sort of leading edge in regards to this area.
So help me understand then, David, what I guess that was like 2014 or so, 2015, what machine learning looked like in the context of the business and the platform that you guys were building versus what AI looks like today. So what help us visualize that.
Yeah, many of the technologies, these foundational technologies have remained pretty consistent. What's possible now is the scale and sophistication of those systems, and what they're capable of doing today is obviously, incredible. The machine learning models we built back in 2013, 2014 were primarily classification machine learning models. What they were able to do very, very accurately was take a large set of data and be trained to understand specific signals within that data. And a signal could be a risk event or a crisis happening. It could be understanding companies and people where they're being mentioned. It could understand topics or narratives or themes. It could understand clusters of conversation. Once you've used those machine learning models to extract those signals, you could connect those signals together and understand the relationship, the velocity, the frequency, the proximity of those signals that were taking place within the data. And so we were the first platform, I would say, in the market, to deliver those sorts of machine learning models to this set of problems. And it allowed us to deliver a set of signals that were just far more accurate, far more scalable, frankly, far more insightful than I believe anything else was available in the market. What the newest AI technologies have enabled, generative AI and large language models, is to go one step further. They still rely actually on a lot of those first order signals that we extract from the data. Those are still invaluable and critical, particularly to give the LLMs relevance and context, and to be able to ensure that what they produce is then accurate. But what they're able to do is produce scalable summaries, interpret that data, and understand the language that much further. And so for us, it's an and, not an or. We still extract these first order signals from the data, and we feed those signals to the large language model technology. And then the large language model technology is able to summarize, synthesize, generate new information off the back of that, create these new natural language interfaces so that people can conversate and interact with those signals in a much more natural language and intuitive fashion. And so one of the most exciting things we've launched very recently is integrating Signal directly into all major LLMs. So via MCP. So our clients can now access Signal, our content, our intelligence, and those signals through Copilot, through ChatGPT, through Claude. And they can use that as the interface, as the window into then accessing all of that underlying intelligence that we aggregate and produce.
So I'm using Claude, and I can connect to my Signal AI through my Signal AI login, and then Claude is pulling from Signal AI.
Exactly. So you can log into Signal and get access to all of our functionality and all of our capabilities within our platform. But also we want to meet our clients where they work. And if you would prefer to interact with Signal through Claude and just ask Claude a question and have Claude then pull back the relevant information from the Signal platform, you now can. And maybe we'll get onto this a little bit later when we talk about reputation and measuring reputation. One of the incredible things that then creates is the ability to connect all of the Signal data to all of the other proprietary data that you have decided to integrate into Claude. Correct. And one of the key things for me in reputation is being able to connect reputation back to business outcomes, back to financial outcomes. And the only way you can do that is by linking the Signal data with your own proprietary data that you hold within your organization.
Absolutely critical, and one of the Achilles heels of the work that we do, right? This idea of connecting things to business outcomes, not just to fluffy or vanity metrics that don't say, maybe they measure output, but they don't measure outcome, right?
Agreed.
So, David, you're a law graduate, so how did you end up? I mean, you explained the story about the garage and your parents. Was being a law graduate an advantage at all?
I think so. I genuinely, yes, and I hopefully say that with no false modesty about the things I couldn't do. I couldn't build the software. I couldn't create the models, but I could ask the questions that mattered. What decision is this helping someone make? Who is accountable for that decision? What happens when it goes wrong? And I think, having a legal background does train you to reason under ambiguity and to weigh evidence and to construct an argument from imperfect information. And that's remarkably close to what our product does for our clients. Engineers are brilliant, but they can also fall into the trap of building things looking for a problem. And I was very much focused on the problem. So rarely we had that perfect, balance between my job being to find the people who could work on the science, like Miguel, and then point all of that capability at something very focused on the customer problem. And that synergy between being really customer oriented and being very focused on solving that customer problem, and just continuing to iterate incrementally on that customer problem and really staying obsessed with that and combining that with best in class science and technology, particularly coming out of academia, that was a real secret sauce for us. And we had an edge, we had a really powerful edge in those early days because, again, we were one of the first companies taking the best academic research out of universities, many of which were in the UK on our doorstep. We've had some of the top universities for over a decade in this particular field. And we were taking a lot of that academic research and then applying it into solving this customer problem that we had uncovered.
That makes a lot of sense. So David, what does the conversation look like with companies as it relates to your platform? What are they looking to solve?
Yeah, look, the conversation has changed profoundly, even in the last 18 months. I would say for the first 5-6 years of building Signal, I was having to convince many of the customers that we work with that, having an AI strategy was going to become important, that using data for true decision-making, for strategic decision-making was essential. And I won't lie, I think in those early days, we were often met with a relatively healthy dose of skepticism, and cynicism about what the technology was capable of and what our clients needed and wanted. And that was reflected probably in who we used to deal with within the organization. We used to deal with more junior, more mid-level folks. The budget may have come out of a C-suite budget, the chief comms officer, the chief risk officer, but ultimately, Our interface was at more junior levels in the business. And 5 years ago, the question was, help me see everything being said about us.
Mm-hmm.
Today, that has shifted dramatically. Today, the question is, help me decide, help me make a decision about how to mitigate a crisis or see one in advance. Help me decide where the white space is that I can build my reputation. Help me figure out how to accelerate and transform our media relation strategy or our influencer engagement strategy. Help me have a conversation with our CEO and our board and advise them on one of the most significant intractable issues that we're dealing with. And our relationship has therefore elevated. That isn't to say we don't still work with all levels across the team, but ultimately the relationship is with the chief communications officer, chief corporate affairs officer, chief risk officer. And I think that is a reflection that our clients are drowning in information and in volatility. Just the world is such a complex and challenging place to navigate today. And they're looking for judgment, they're looking for advice, they're looking for decision grade intelligence. And so, concretely, I would say in the last 3 to 4 years of building Signal, clients are coming to us, with the most strategic questions that they need to answer. And that is shifting both the value of those questions that we're answering, but also, as mentioned, who's in the room. And ultimately, we are servicing the CEO and the board as much as we're servicing any of the direct people, budget holders that we're, and the vessel to do that through is the chief communications, chief corporate affairs officer. But it is a CEO issue. It is a board issue that we're helping them grapple with or navigate. As has been often discussed now in the space, when I first started selling into comms and corporate affairs, often it would report into the chief marketing officer. It was not perceived, in my opinion, at that point as a CEO level, board level set of issues. That has completely changed.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is both a reflection of the external environment that we find ourselves in. It's also a reflection of the quality of the data and the intelligence that function can bring into the conversation to be taken seriously and be truly credible.
And speaking of the judgment, that is absolutely critical, and that goes behind everything you guys offer with your platform. Because I strongly believe that the critical thinking and the judgment and the ultimate decision making should sit in-house with those teams that directly advise the CEO or the C-suite on those topics, right? To what extent you guys see that happening in-house versus you helping them develop that judgment, or actually doing the analysis yourselves for the clients?
Yeah, I think working in symbiosis with our clients within the client team to take the data and transform that into something that can be used to deliver to the CEO and to the board. That is where the best results are found. So ultimately, we want partnership with the chief comms corporate affairs officer, with the chief risk officer. And through that partnership, we can leverage the technology and the data to deliver something that is CEO and board level. Now, in a real-time crisis, sometimes we need to go direct to the CEO and to the board. And we've been in occasions where, for example, there's been a cyber attack and the client's email has gone down, and we're delivering via WhatsApp directly into the CEO and to members of the executive board. But in a lot of cases, what we want to do is work collaboratively with those C-level executives, the chief comms, chief risk officer, to leverage the technology and the data as the channel to do that. Interestingly, historically, the professional service firm or the agency or the consulting would be the third leg of that stool. But what we are seeing is clients increasingly bringing more of that capability in-house, using those professional service firms for very selective, specific, sorts of work. But on the day-to-day, rather using the technology and the data, and then having the capability and the competency to apply that judgment, as you describe it, directly into the data. And that is a much faster flywheel, a more efficient flywheel, much better context around the business problem and the business opportunity. And I think back to that MCP integration into the LLMs, that is only going to accelerate that further, because what we're doing is we're democratizing access of the data and the intelligence that we provide and making it more readily available to all parts of the organization who are already living and breathing inside of their Copilot or their Claude or their ChatGPT or their enterprise GPT setup. And so we're compressing the access to the data.
Yeah.
It used to be that we would rely on a small number of power users within an organization who really understood how to use the functionality of Signal, and they would then distribute the knowledge from Signal out to the wider team that they work with, to their senior stakeholders. Well, now we can make that Signal available to everyone who has a Copilot login.
Got it.
And suddenly we've democratized from the 20 power users to the global team of 500 across that organization. And that is a game changer for accessing data and insight in a much more scalable and real-time fashion.
Absolutely. And that's, in my view, a critical success factor, not only for you guys, but also for the companies who use this and want to make the best out of the platform. So it's basically integrating and making it a native tool, right? It's just
exactly meeting your clients where they work. And that's always been the limiting factor with software, enterprise software. You had to onboard, you had to train, you had to enable every customer. Your value was only so good as their ability to use your software, and it was often trapped and siloed in a much smaller community within an organization. And now if we can distribute this into all aspects of their ways of working, even go beyond Copilot into Teams. If enterprise businesses are using Teams for their chat and their communication, let's integrate into Teams. Let's integrate into email. Let's allow our clients to call back the data, the value from the Signal platform wherever they're working. Yeah. And so people say to me, well, doesn't the integration into these LLMs in some ways shrink your market or cannibalize your business? And in fact, I think it's the opposite. It expands the addressable market, because now I can make Signal available to so many more people in the organization across all levels, regardless of their competency in using my specific piece of software.
So, David, in a continuum where you have preventing a catastrophe on one extreme, and on the other extreme you have building a forward-looking operation, where are companies on average as it relates to integrating the platform like Signal AI?
Yeah, what you've described are the two foundational use cases, let's call it, for Signal. One is about, crisis. It used to be about crisis management, and now it's about crisis prevention.
Yes.
And our tools are increasingly allowing our customers to see those crises in advance and hopefully have the data to get ahead of those and anticipate those, and therefore manage them and mitigate them rather than just react to them. And that's one foundational use case. And the other is about building reputation and creating great strategy for growth by seeing where the opportunity for white space is, by seeing where you can build reputation most effectively, by understanding what's most likely to go viral or to gain, the best possible engagement. And so there's both the protect and there's the promote and build part of what we offer. If I would speak, about the experience of the last 5 years, I would say it's the crisis or catastrophe that has probably opened the door most regularly in recent years. Someone gets blindsided, the board asks, how did we miss this? And budget becomes available to try and make sure that doesn't happen again. And I understand that. And frankly, the defensive case, often justifies the investment. A crisis caught 2 weeks early, pays for the platform and our services many times over. But on the flip side, you've got the clients who gain even more value, are the ones that then graduate not just from insurance, but to advantage. And so, the forward-looking operation where reputation becomes this asset that you actively manage rather than look at in the rear window, spotting the white space topics that your competitors have yet to claim, understanding which narratives are moving, timing announcements for maximum impact. Reputation, as we know, built well, is this commercial driver, lowers cost of capital, wins you talent, earns you benefit of doubt when something goes wrong. So I think the combination of both of those use cases is where customers will gain the best results. And then underpinning both of those, let's call it the basics. And the basics have got to work brilliantly, and we often come back to what we call the basics at Signal, which is coverage, quality, and usability. Do you have the right data, breadth, depth, diversity? Can your clients rely on you to never miss a story? Do you have the right data quality? Can you truly separate the signal from the noise and deliver the highest quality insights and intelligence that clients can trust? And is your product usable? Is it intuitive? Is it frictionless? And increasingly, as we were just discussing, can you meet your clients where they work? So you've got these two strategic use cases of, call it like defense and offense, to be very American, but underpinning both is got to be the basics, is the foundation. And the foundation, we often come back to the foundation. It's kind of funny, actually, doing this since 2013, and innovation it's a bit like a corkscrew. You go up and closer to your vision, but you always come back round to the fundamentals. And in my world, those three are the fundamentals.
I like this idea of an AI-powered platform allowing you to go from insurance to competitive advantage, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that you need both. You need both.
So let's talk now a little bit about reputation, which underpins every single thing you guys do, right? And you have a very specific view of reputation. I want to talk about the Signal AI 500 ranking, but before that, walk me through your view on reputation. What is the framework you work off of?
Yeah, so ultimately, I think it's important. There is a legacy of incredibly high quality thinking that's gone into this space, and I think often trying to reinvent the wheel at all times is not that helpful. As we both know, 30 years ago, business schools, communication academics, everywhere from MIT to Wharton were, defining what corporate reputation is, and we're experimenting with how to measure it. Obviously, a lot of that's led to some forms of commercialization. You've got, the Harris Poll, Reputation Institute, and there's that classic definition of a perceptual representation of a company's past actions and future prospects that describes the firm's overall appeal. And so, I think reputation is often defined in contrast to brand. And I think that's an important distinction that we often talk about. Brand being the promise, it's the expectation you set in your control. Reputation is the delivery, it's the experience, it sits in your stakeholders' hands, it's perception, it's highly sensitive to events, and it has to be earned. And I think, reputation historically, as we know, was measured in surveys, which we have a lot of respect for it at Signal, and Signal AI, the Signal AI 500 is, speaks to that. But what we believe is that there's a way to be much more dynamic and much more predictive and much more real time, rather than, if a survey is a picture, we want an always on film. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but, we want to go from snapshot to something that's much more digital, much more agile, much more always on, grounded in dynamic data, conversational analysis, rather than the challenges of the periodic, snapshot. And so we've established a sort of view that reputation can be measured across three main pillars: innovation, performance, and purpose. And underneath those pillars, we have drivers, and underneath those drivers, we can have topics of conversation, and we can then analyze that in a very, very dynamic way. But we also are not sort of arrogant enough to think that, that framework is the only framework, and we have to force our customers into using that specific framework, because that doesn't reflect necessarily their context or their reality. And so we have an established view, an opinionated view of how to measure reputation in that sort of framework, but we will work collaboratively with the client and can be adaptive. So Signal AI 500 is very much structured and fixed around that framework. But when we're doing something more bespoke for a client, we'll work with them in a way that reflects their reality as well.
To what extent do companies have a very strong and well-defined view of reputation versus them saying, I'm going to go with your framework.
Well, I would say it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the clients we work with are just getting onto the journey. This is their first few steps from, doing monitoring and doing some very basic, counting of articles. And for them, often they don't have a very specifically defined way of measuring reputation. They don't know how to take that reputation framework and correlate it or coalesce it to other business metrics. And so we take them on a journey in that 80% category, from moving them up that maturity curve, from going beyond what I would describe as, counting clips and vanity metrics into something much more strategic, much more business relevant. And we go on a journey with them to do that. And in those cases, often they're using our framework. Then you've got the 20%, and that 20%, by the way, is growing. 3 years ago, it was probably 10%, and now it's 20%. And I think in a few years, it'll be closer to 50%. They have done the work, and they have formed an opinion of how to establish and represent their reputation strategy. And then we're working with them strategically to either adapt or build out a framework that reflects that. And they have an opinionated view of how they want to connect our data to other stakeholder data sets. Do they want to link it to employee sentiment and feedback? Do they collect customer feedback and they want to understand how media and social sentiment correlates with that? Have they got a view of actually, can they, apportion some of their market cap or share price to reputation, and they want to understand how we can connect and correlate the reputational data to actual share price or market cap value? And that cohort is growing, but it's still, I would say, the minority versus the majority.
Got it. So there is this concept, and I know you and I discussed this when we connected in preparation for today's recording. I mentioned this notion of narrative intelligence and the white paper that the Scriptorian Initiative wrote about it, and I'm thinking that obviously a platform like Signal AI, AI's platform is very much in line with that concept of narrative intelligence, and I'm thinking that this whole idea of narrative, your narrative and the activation of the narrative being a very fluid thing, right? That changes almost by the day, results in reputation becoming a very, very changing concept, right? So any thoughts on that? How ready are companies to ride this wave? Because it's in my experience, companies are way slower than how technology is progressing, right?
Yeah. I smile because I couldn't agree more. But I think intuitively we all know reputation, risk, this moves in minutes and hours, not months and quarters. So that's why for us at Signal, having this real-time view is critical. And I think classic reputation surveys sort of give you this slightly backward-looking, lagging indicator, and clients want to be more predictive. There is a desire, particularly because of what's happened in the last 5 years and the number of issues and crises and the volatility and change. Clients really do want to be much more predictive. And so increasingly they're coming to us and asking us to give them a much more dynamic set of data. And that can connect to the reputational, to the lagging view. It's almost like we can provide the lead indicators, and you can still have a lag indicator, to connect that to. But ultimately you need something that's much more dynamic and much more real time, because the environment is changing so fast around us. If you would have asked me the questions, are teams ready 18 months ago? I would have said no. Neither typically the competency or skills within most teams, nor sometimes the culture or the mindset. But the LLM and generative AI wave that has occurred is changing that rapidly. It is a forcing function for almost every organization and business to sort of look at their ways of working and say, are we prepared for this future? And it's not nice that everyone is actually quite existentially scared about the technology, but again, it's quite a powerful way to get people to change their behavior. Not least as well, the CFO, the CEO is demanding that. There is suddenly this pressure to consolidate vendors, to bring AI into your ways of working. If we're going to invest in huge amounts of token budget, then we need to figure out ways of driving efficiencies in other areas. And so every team is being asked this question of, what are we doing to change our ways of working, to change our culture, to change our mindset, and who are the right partners to work with to go on that journey? And that is proving to be a very fertile ground for us to be able to then work with our clients in a totally different way. And as I mentioned, for example, this MCP integration, bringing our data and insights directly into our clients' LLMs, that is another huge opportunity to just bring what we do and what our clients are trying to achieve that much closer together.
Yes. So let's talk about mis and disinformation, polarized media, low quality, noise everywhere in terms of quality of content, I mean. So how do you guys filter through all that confidently?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest problems in the space, and yet it's also a critical area for clients. It's not just about filtering. It's and this is slightly counterintuitive, but there's almost intelligence within the misinformation that I think is important for clients to understand. Knowing that someone is propagating a false narrative or misinformation about your business or your brand is really important to understand. And that comes back to what we were discussing around the risk use case, the insurance side of what we do. In terms of, from a filtering perspective, I think it's really critical not to treat all content as equal. And, this is where licensed premium information, trusted sources of data is becoming increasingly important. And we work very closely with media organizations, and we license our data compliantly. It's a critical part of our value proposition. And, as you can imagine, the rights holders and the media organizations are also very nervous about what this future world means for them, and the cannibalization of what they offer and the shrinking of their addressable market. But I personally believe, I don't think we've figured out all the ways of monetizing what they do yet, but I personally believe that the value and the criticality of what they do and the atomic value of trust that they produce in their content, is the value of that is going up. And so I think we need to give, provenance to that. We need to make sure to highlight that. We need to be able to tell our clients what comes from credible sources and what doesn't. The second, as I mentioned, is about, where we do see low quality information, synthetic data, misinformation, false narratives bubbling up. We need to alert our clients to that. And that's really critical. And then the final thing I think is that every time a technology is used as a weapon, it typically can also be used as a shield. So all the same tools and techniques and technologies being used to produce the misinformation is also sort of the same set of techniques and tools and technologies that you can use to detect and assess those. And often, I think in these sorts of, the weaponization of technology, it's a little bit of a race where new capabilities are created, new responses need to be formed. So I think we need to sort of, as a service provider, operate with some level of humility, know that we don't have the answer to everything, and then continue to have the commitment and conviction that we're going to play catch up where we need to.
And in that, just let me stop for a second on something you just said. So the information that should never make it to the client, is that something that the technology is able to detect and remove? Or is it a human behind it that will go to the client to tell the client to not disregard this information?
Well, the technology is capable of saying, here's some different, let's say, risks or issues that you are facing. Here are the ones that are coming from credible, trusted sources that have some level of, quality and efficacy behind them. And here are some that are coming from sources that you cannot trust.
Okay.
and look like they are much more either low quality or propagate false narratives or produce synthetic information, or bots from social media. It's equally important, in my opinion, to show the customer the low quality stuff as it is to show them the high quality stuff,
Okay.
but very important to be able to separate the two and label them accordingly. Now, when we're delivering a daily briefing to a global organization and that briefing goes to all the way to the board and the CEO, we don't include that sort of low quality stuff.
Yeah.
We rarely apply a very high bar in terms of quality filter. But when we're delivering it directly to a risk team or we're delivering it directly to the comms function and we've given the brief around getting ahead of risk, then it's actually really important to show that low quality stuff as well, in my opinion.
And low quality defined as what? So, because low quality could have huge reach anyways, right?
Exactly. And that's why it's super important to show, because something may be coming from a non-reputed source, but is going viral or is getting a lot of readership. It's getting huge amounts of engagement. So just applying a hard filter to say, well, we're only going to look at tier one premium trusted media, in my opinion, is leaving you exposed to risk. So what we'll say is, hey, someone is writing this stuff about you. And by the way, we don't know this source. Like this is a random blog, or this is a social media account that has no followers on it. But by the way, this post is going viral. And we see that more and more frequently now, which is something can come out of the blue from a Substack account or a blog or a social media account that no one's ever heard of before, but has managed to optimize the content and position it in a way that it's gone viral.
Good. Let me put you on the spot now. Previous guest here told companies to build their own intelligent engines and not be held hostage to a black box from an external provider. You are the external provider in a way. So what's your answer to that?
Well, I think there's truth in the sense of we shouldn't be accepting of black boxes. I think we need to be able to understand the inputs, and we need to be able to double click into the outputs. And that's a critical part of what Signal does. Where I differ with him is on the build it yourself sort of conclusion, because ultimately you would be replicating a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of expense, where your focus and your value comes in at a different part of the value chain, in my opinion. So building what Signal's built, an intelligence engine like what we've created, means licensing and aggregating and accessing, global data at enormous cost, not least from the hosting, but the licensing, the premium access, maintaining all of the models in hundreds of languages, adding in all of that compute, all of that intelligence. You're talking about many seven figures of cost just to host and house something of our scale. Where I think the opportunity comes in is moving up the value chain and thinking about, well, how do I, as a practitioner, sit on the shoulder of what's already been built, all of this capability, all of this data, all of this intelligence, all of this computational value that's been created. What do I add on top of that allows me to differentiate the outputs and give me a competitive advantage? And there's never been a time where you can start to digitize your knowledge and IP as a practitioner into skills. You can basically, in the most basic form, it's a prompt, like a really well-constructed prompt. But in the most sophisticated form now, it's agents that you've created that reflect how you work, how you think, the context of your business, your skills and your domain expertise. And you can now apply those skills, those agents, those really custom prompts on top of an engine like Signal's to produce outputs that no one else can produce. And you can there preserve that knowledge and that IP from your team perspective, so that if someone leaves the team, you retain that knowledge and expertise. You don't have that brain drain. You can share that knowledge so that you can scale your collective expertise and experience within a team. And that's where I would be focusing my efforts and energy. Like to go and rebuild Signal, you're talking about years and years worth of effort, millions and millions of dollars of investment, way too much licensing and compute cost for any normal organization to consider taking on. But you can build this very unique IP on top of that no one else can build, because that's your domain knowledge and your expertise. And so I think whoever shared that with you is focusing actually on the wrong part of the value chain. And if they really focus on what I just described, they'll create something that is no one else can create, that is truly defensible.
So I fully agree, David. And the to what extent? I mean, based on the potential that is out of question, the potential of all these for reputation management and intelligence is again out of question. To what extent because you were talking earlier about mindset, culture, ways of working, which to me, I would add to that leadership, courage to leap into all this with decisiveness, right? So to what extent, in your experience, are companies structured the right way or not, and have the right talent in place and the right mindset and the right culture to maximize the technology?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think organizational design is in many ways almost a bigger constraint than the technology. The tools and the capability have sort of outrun the organizational chart. So there's a structural problem, which is that sort of the outside world doesn't really respect internal silos, but sort of companies work and process through silos regardless of that. So a narrative that starts as a consumer complaint becomes a regulatory issue, which becomes an investor concern, which becomes a liquidity issue. But in most large companies, those are very siloed functions and can transition through those different teams who are barely speaking to one another. So the intelligence is there. It's the connective tissue that we need to enhance, and that's compounded, I think, also by talent. The sort of talent that we've got, and when I talk about talent, I'm really talking about sort of skills, who are able to sort of interpret a machine's output into something that can be acted upon. And that used to be about analytics and data, but I think it's increasingly confidence and familiarity with using these AI tools. But I think all of that is very fixable. I think increasingly we're seeing organizations appoint an owner or owners, establishing more of a common framework, having sort of translators across different teams, forming more cross-functional working groups. Even the relationship between risk and comms, which is we operate very much at the intersection. Those were two functions 10 years ago. They didn't even know where they sat in the building. Now they are very, very close allies and collaborators, and are often building a common view, co-owning parts of the risk register together. So increasingly companies are putting a reputation risk component into their risk register, and the chief comms and chief risk officer will co-own that in many businesses. And so that's a good example of like having the relationship, the dialogue, having a framework that they can work on in a joined up fashion, having the data technology then available to power that. So I think it is evolving, but I would say those are the organizational design, the connectivity and communication, and then the talent and skills are probably three major challenges.
We are witnessing the renaissance of earned media, and this is something that is being discussed a lot, especially on LinkedIn. LLMs focus mostly on third-party credible sources to form their view of a brand. How accurate is that in your view?
Yeah, well, I would certainly agree that earned media is coming back into the spotlight, which is fantastic. I think even as a subset of that, media relations is coming back into the spotlight as because of that. And I think you're very right. I think LLMs are trained and essentially grounded predominantly on sort of open source content, journalism, analyst commentary. social media. So, your advertising budget buys you almost nothing in that world. And so actually marketing are not particularly empowered to influence how you're going to show up. Whereas what third parties independently say about you is basically how the machine is learning who you are and what to say about you. And so, that renaissance of earned media that you're describing is very literal. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for the chief communications officer and the comms function to therefore lead and take ownership. If they're going to do that, they need data and they need tools that are relevant to them, not relevant to a marketer. And I think most of the tools and data that have become available in the market really speak to this area as if it is an extension of SEO, whereas really what this is an extension of your earned media and your media relation strategy. And so you need data that shows how your earned media is influencing the large language models and how to therefore rank and prioritize where to focus. And if you connect that with readership data to understand how that's influencing your human stakeholders, then suddenly you've got something really powerful, which is you can both understand where to focus your efforts and energy for your people-based stakeholders, where you can focus your efforts and energy on these new LLM-based stakeholders, where is the intersection and overlap between those two worlds. And that can reshape your media relation strategy, who you want to talk to, how you're going to position your content and your narratives, how you're going to speak and what you're going to say.
Good. David, a couple more questions and we'll be wrapping up.
Sure.
I have a provocative thought and I want your reaction to it. In no time, your company's reputation will solely depend on what LLMs say about you.
Yeah, I think it's provocative. I don't know if I agree with it quite yet. I think large language models will continue to become the primary interface to knowledge about your business. And so, when a customer or a candidate or journalist ask a question about your company, the answer they're going to get, a reputational event at scale, is going to have a big impact. But LLMs, I would say, are downstream. They don't originate perception. They compress it or they summarize it. The upstream sources for reputation, in my opinion, are still journalists, the regulators, your employees, your customers, lived experience. So in order to affect the downstream outcomes, you need to fix the upstream outcomes. If you just obsess about optimizing for the model, then you're never really going to build reputation effectively. And then finally, secondly, reputation is ultimately settled, in my view, in experience. So if your product fails or your conduct is poor, or your supply chain blows up, no amount of favorable machine summarization is going to help defend your reputation. And an LLM may be saying one thing because it hasn't caught up with that yet, but the lived experience of your stakeholders is going to be much more fundamental and important. So I think it's a very important interface. I think it's going to become increasingly influential, but I would say focus more on the upstream and you'll drive better results on the downstream.
Love that. David, who would you like to see sitting in this podcast next?
Can I give you two, or is that cheating?
Sure. And I'm going to ask you to connect me with them, by the way.
No, with pleasure. With pleasure. So two people that came to mind, quite different. Probably one of the most sophisticated practitioners we work with. So as a client, the global head of corporate affairs, Jane Lowry from KPMG. And, she's really pioneered this trust measurement program at KPMG. And when we talk about trust, we really went far beyond just measuring reputation into measuring other stakeholder data sets and bringing that together into a truly unified measurement program that connected all of that, and then using that data to really drive decision making. So I think she would be a fantastic person for you to talk to and someone you'd enjoy getting on a call with. And then secondly, the other person that came to mind was Daniel Hulme from WPP, global head of AI there. And I think he is a really forward-looking, creative mind when it comes to AI and the opportunities across both comms, but also marketing and beyond. And he's really future gazing as to what's possible from an agency perspective. And obviously we touched on a little bit, there is so much change happening in that world. And they're almost adapting into becoming technology companies themselves. And so he might be an interesting person to speak to about that future too.
Absolutely. No question about that. So before I let you go, David, where can people find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, David Benigson. They can find me on Twitter, David Signal AI. And yeah, those are probably two good places to start.
Very good. So before I share my headline for today's conversation, David, I want to thank you for such an insightful conversation. You brought this very technology-driven perspective, but also a lot of common sense I saw coming across in this conversation. So I loved your perspective, and I hope we can stay in touch and maybe have another conversation, a repeat in a maybe 12 months from now, because I'm pretty sure that things will have changed dramatically again. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your brilliant questions, and it was a lovely conversation. Great to chat.
Very good. So for everybody else, the headline for today, I actually had two, and I was going back and forth, but I'm going to keep it to the first one that I jotted down, which was technology is outrunning organizational charts, and that should give people a lot to think about. So I hope that it does. And for everybody in the audience, thank you so much for listening. We ask you to subscribe to the Reputation Room on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and or YouTube. Follow us on thereputationroom.com. And please share, if you like this and enjoy the conversation, please share it with your network. Thank you so much, and until next time.